Today we're going to talk about managing turf grass in the shade. And here we have a nice area with, you see a tree here and some turf grass on the ground. So the first thing we have to think about is selecting the right species. So if you have a Bermuda grass lawn or a zoysia grass lawn, those are warm season grasses and they prefer the full sun. Now there are some cool season grasses, those that prefer or do better in the spring and the fall, that are more shade tolerant than the warm season grasses. Here we see an area that has tall fescue planted. You can also use Kentucky bluegrass, and a lot of times what we recommend is if you can find actually a blend of tall fescue with Kentucky bluegrass, those can do quite well in the shade. So what we want to do is think about, well, how if we have a shade area, we have a tree or a building, how do we manage the turf in that area so that it can be nice and green and lush and not die out on us? So the first thing we have to think about, it really is mowing height. And so what we want to do is raise the mower up in the shade and mow at 3 inches or taller. And a lot of times you'll see the Bermuda grass yard out in the full sun may be mowed at 1 inch or 2 inch, and then you have this like step up, and the tall fescue or cool season in the shade may be mowed at 3 inches or higher. And we want to do that to encourage root growth and allow more sunlight to penetrate through. The next thing we have to think about is if it's an option for you and you can do some selective pruning of tree limbs. We just want to try to allow more sunlight to come down into the area. Now sometimes this is an option, especially if we're talking about building or house shade. And so the other things we have to think about is how do we manage the fertilizer? Well, the fertilizer in the shade, you want to actually use less fertilizer. And maybe for a tall fescue yard like this, maybe only 2 or 3 pounds per year is all it would take, and probably closer to the 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year is all it would need. And then apply your phosphorus, potassium according to a soil test. Now the irrigation here, because it's in the shade, it's not in the sunlight, there's not as much evaporation, you're going to use less irrigation in the shade as well. And so what we want to do is just only water it when it's dry, and that's probably a big point that we try to get across for the whole yard, but especially in the shade. And you're going to notice if you just take a screwdriver or something and try to stick it in, it's going to be wet a lot longer than out in the full sun. So only water as needed in the shade. Another thing to think about is, well, what about if we have a lot of traffic coming through? And you can see an area here in the gardens where there's this pathway that kind of leads through to the stone here, to the hardscape, and the grass really starts to thin out as people walk through here. So the turf grasses are usually pretty good at tolerating traffic, but once you throw in another stress like a shade stress, they really start to die out and thin out. So here we have to think about maybe expanding this hardscape out further, or if we want to, we can come back for these cool season grasses in the fall and overseed or reseed areas like this. Now a lot of times you'll see people, it seems like every fall they're out reseeding that shading area, and then the summer comes and it dies out, and the next fall they're overseeding it again. Now if you're doing this over and over and over again, it's probably time to start thinking about some alternatives to turf grass. And so here you see a really nice area all the way up to this tree here in the shade, where you have several different types of perennials here that do much better than turf grass and even more aesthetically pleasing. For more information on managing turf grass in the shade in Oklahoma, see our fact sheet HLA 6608.